Hello and welcome back to the Hall of Sports podcast. I'm Kieran and I'm here today with JJ Stankevitz, one of the Bears beat reporters. We're today going to be talking about kind of the game from last week and previewing the game from this week. But I guess we have nowhere else to start but the news that's been hitting this week with Allen Robinson. We've heard in kind of recent months that the Bears have been trying to get a deal done with him, but it kind of has gone quiet over kind of the last couple of weeks when you would have expected a deal getting done. We saw a couple of the wide receivers just before week one get their contract extensions, and I think a lot of Bears fans were a bit confused to why it hasn't happened with Allen Robinson. You saw a lot of his teammates come out during the week basically trying to force the hand of the front office to get it done. So what have you been hearing over the past week? Has there been any steps of progress, or are we still in kind of the same spot as we were prior to the start of the season?
Yeah, I think that last one's a good question. George McCaskey here in Chicago went on a local radio station and said the most recent update he got from Ted Phillips, the team president who handles the business side of things, was optimistic. But so far, from Allen Robinson's camp, it has not felt particularly optimistic. Friday morning as well, there was the report from ESPN's Dan Graziano that the Bears were offering Allen Robinson essentially Cooper Kupp money, which is $15 to $16 million a year. Allen Robinson wants about $18 million, which would be less than what Keenan Allen got from the Los Angeles Chargers in his 4-year, $80.1 million contract. I think Keenan Allen is a really good comparison here for Allen Robinson. They're around the same age. They're both getting their third contracts. They both had some injuries in their past, but they both are really, really good wide receivers. And the going rate for really, really good wide receivers is about $20 million a year. So if Allen Robinson is okay and his camp is okay with $18 million a year, with obviously the guaranteed money being a different side of that, I fail to understand why the Bears haven't sprinted to get that contract in front of him. It doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, Kieran, Allen Robinson's the guy you want to keep on your team. He does everything well on the field. We all see how he runs his routes, sets up his routes, how detailed he is, how just tremendous a player Allen Robinson is. You take that, and then you take who he is off the field, the kind of locker room presence he is. I've said it a bunch of times, but there's a really good reason why the Bears put Riley Ridley, their 4th-round pick from 2019. They stuck his locker right next to Allen Robinson's at Hallis Hall last year because they wanted him to learn from A-Rob. And when you hear from coaches praise for Darnell Mooney, that he reminds them of what Allen Robinson does in the film room. That's about as high of praise as a coach could give to a young player. And then outside of the building, Allen Robinson is a very, very vocal and thoughtful voice for Black Lives Matter. His charity, the Allen Robinson Within Reach Foundation, does a lot of good things for Black communities in Chicago. He is a consummate professional, an ideal representative of the Chicago Bears, both on and off the field. It makes no sense to me why this deal has not got done yet.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's one of those that I think as a fan going into the offseason, it was one of the things I expected to get done. I don't think anybody knew what was going to happen in the offseason. Obviously, with the pandemic, it kind of blew everything out of the water. But it was the one thing that you expected because at the start of most seasons now, you've seen one deal get done in pretty much every season. I think we saw Eddie Goldman in recent years. We've seen Akeem Hicks. Eddie Jackson was last year.
Cody Whitehair,
yeah, Cody Whitehair as well. So I think everybody just took it as it was going to happen. And now the fact that we've got into the season, it seems like it's one of those that I don't think anybody can quite comprehend why it hasn't been done, especially with the report that came out today that he was asking for 18 when you see receivers that are kind of within his range that are getting more in the NFL right now. And then you look at his importance to the offense. It's not like a Kansas City Chiefs completely where they like to spread it around a lot, but Mitch has said it himself that when he's in trouble, the one person he looks to is Allen Robinson. And really, he's the one that kind of gets Mitch out of a lot of trouble when you even saw it last week where when he throws it into double or triple coverage, if Allen Robinson is there's times that he can come down with the ball. You don't see that with a lot of other wide receivers. I think as a lot of Bears fans are probably quite annoyed because how long did we go without having a number one wide receiver and saying it every single year that we either need to draft one or we need to sign one in free agency. And we finally get one in Allen Robinson, and they're not giving him the extension that rightfully he deserves. As you said, both on the field and off the field. You see it, you constantly see it, even from where I'm just through Twitter. You see all the work he does within the communities in Chicago, and especially nowadays with everything with the Black Lives Matter. It's one of those things that's important. Before, I know the one kind of criticism people have of other players like Khalil Mack is that he's not more outspoken, and you don't see him as much in front of the cameras or taking like interviews, for example. This was a perfect week for Allen Robinson to say nothing. And he came out, the next day, and was doing an interview with the media. You don't see many players do that. And also while doing that, kind of treating it in like as respect to the city as well. It wasn't just about him. He didn't want to say anything disrespectful to his coaches, to his teammates, or the city. But he's been very clear in that this is business. And for him, he said it before, he wants to stay, but unless I think the Bears actually give a little more, he'll be happy to go to free agency next year where he's going to be guaranteed that money. But I think he would probably make more if he went to free agency next season if he had a good season. So I think it would be very wise for the Bears to actually try and spend that money, even if it is the $18 million per season, because like you said, he deserves it.
I mean, look, if the Bears can't fit Allen Robinson in their future plans because he's asking for too much money, then the problem is not that Allen Robinson's asking for too much money. The problem is that the Bears gave the money to the wrong players.
Yeah.
I mean, if you can't keep Allen Robinson around because you paid Nick Foles $24 million guaranteed, or you got, some other guys locked up into contracts that you can't get out of as quickly as you might like, then that's the fault of management. That's the fault of the scouting department. That's the fault of everyone in the front office, because Allen Robinson is a really, really good football player. And for all the things you mentioned, Kieran, about the Bears not having a number one receiver and A-Rob being the security blanket for Mitch, if you lose that, the scenario, like the worst case scenario I keep going back to, is that the Bears are saying, well, we might need to pay a quarterback next year. But whoever that quarterback is, whether it's Mitch Trubisky or someone else, if that guy shows up to Chicago and Allen Robinson isn't here, they're not going to have as much success as you would like to think they would. Because that Allen Robinson is a number one receiver in the NFL. Those guys are not easy to find. And maybe you're betting that Anthony Miller can become that. Maybe you're betting that the offense can be that, quote unquote, spread it around offense with, Miller and Darnell Mooney and Cole Kmet and these guys. But why are you betting on something that's an unknown when you have a known in Allen Robinson, a known quantity who is a really good football player? Those guys are not cheap, but they also don't come along very often. And when they come along, you got to pay them. So, and look, the other part of this, Kieran, that I'm confused by is, like we mentioned, Ryan Pace has paid Akeem Hicks, Eddie Goldman, Cody Whitehair, Eddie Jackson. He's rewarded these guys with extensions. And he's made it a point to show the league, his locker room, that, hey, if you perform well, you are a good representative of our organization. We are going to reward you handsomely with market value contracts. Eddie Jackson's contract was the biggest ever given to a safety. So the Bears are not shy about paying these guys. Why they are all of a sudden shy about paying Allen Robinson, even with, the pandemic maybe being the salary cap drops $23 million next year, it doesn't make sense to me. It really does not. He's the guy you got to pay. He's the one you want to pay. And like you said, if the Bears don't do it, someone else is.
Yeah, and that's the issue. And the important point that you made there was if they're thinking that they might have to pay a quarterback next year. Look, at the end of the day, I think they'd be happy if Mitch had a great year and they had to pay him. But if he doesn't work out, then realistically, you're probably looking towards the draft to kind of circumvent the problems that they have at the quarterback position. Because really, there's not going to be much out there in terms of the free agent market for quarterbacks next season. So, really, no matter if you were planning on that, where you might have to bring in someone from the draft, why would you not want Allen Robinson being there for a young quarterback? So, again, every kind of debate that goes against signing him, I don't understand the rationale for it, because he's probably one of the most consistent players that's been on the team over the last 2 or 3 seasons.
I mean, on offense, he is the most consistent player.
Yeah.
It's not even close. And again, if you are going into 2021 and Allen Robinson is not part of your plans, or your plan is we're gonna put him on the tag and piss him off by doing that, then what is your plan? Like that is the question I have, is if you are not willing to commit this money to he stays in Chicago for the next 3, 4, 5 years, then what is your plan? What is Ryan Pace's long-term vision for this offense? Because I don't know what it is. I'm already concerned because the whole quarterback thing this offseason kind of felt like they were just going all in on 2020. We'll worry about 2021 later. I mean, if Nick Foles doesn't start a game this year, that still is the Bears' best case outcome, but you guaranteed him a lot of money to not start a game. So there are just a lot of questions. The Jimmy Graham contract, while I don't think it's as bad as some people thought, they can get out of it next year. You're willing to kind of overpay a little bit to get Jimmy Graham here, but you're not willing to pay market value on Allen Robinson. There are just so many questions about this that don't make sense. It's why I wrote a bit about this on NBCSportsChicago.com this week. I think a deal still gets done. It just makes too much sense. But, if we get into October and a deal isn't done and the Bears are maybe struggling a little bit, Allen Robinson has every right to be like, get me out of here. And the Bears should probably listen to him and maybe just say, all right, you know what? Someone else can pay you the money that you deserve. It's not going to be us. And that would be a failure by the organization if it came to, we just got to get that second round draft pick. That would be a failure by the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, it's the one thing that worries me, that the longer this goes on, the more likely it is that maybe he does request a trade, or maybe he just decides, look, I don't want to have to deal with this quarterback frenzy here anymore, and I just kind of play my game this season and then get my money in the off season. That's one of the, I think, very likely scenarios. So we talk about the quarterback position, and obviously this off season it was probably the biggest storyline, very similar to last season with the kickers. But then when Mitch played last week, the first 3 quarters, I think everybody was pulling their hair out about how the team were moving offensively. Yeah, there was 1 or 2 passes that you would have thought could have scored with. The one that went to Jimmy Graham early in the first quarter where he mistimes his jump, and probably if he gets that correct, he probably scores. And then the one where Mitch runs outside the pocket and passes to Robinson, who from my vantage point, it looked like one of his arms was being held back. But other than that, you didn't see much from Trubisky for the first 3 quarters. And then suddenly in the fourth quarter, it was like that Eagles game where he plays terrible for a good 2 quarters, and suddenly it's like a different player when he's not thinking as much. Do you think throughout the season we're going to see this kind of inconsistency, or do you think it's only a matter of time before Foles probably takes over?
I think you're going to see a lot of this inconsistency throughout the season. I'm writing something up on NBCSportsChicago.com today on Friday that kind of looks at the Bears are really good on first down, and yet kept getting in 3rd and long. And they could not convert those 3rd and longs. They couldn't even convert the 3rd and shorts.
Yeah.
And I think that's just going to be kind of the roller coaster of the season with Mitch as the quarterback. you're going to get these great moments like you got in the fourth quarter, but you're also going to get 8 of 20 passing in the first half, which wasn't all his fault, but he also was at fault for some of the inaccuracies that he made. So, I think if you want to, what the Bears are going to have to figure out as the season goes on is, can you live with the downs because the ups are so high? If you can, then Mitch is your starting quarterback all year. If you're like, you know what, these downs are just, they are starting to really ruin our vibe. They're starting to ruin any mojo we have as an offense. You go with the guy who's probably going to be more like this instead of like this.
Yeah.
So that guy's Nick Foles. But I think we're a long way off from that happening at this point. That fourth quarter comeback, I think, bought Mitch another month at the very least. I don't envision him getting replaced before the Buccaneers game on Thursday night here over in the States. So I think probably this is going to be Mitch's show for a little while, and we'll just see. The Giants' defense is bad.
Yeah,
they are a beatable team that he can maybe build some momentum off of going into that Falcons game, because once you get the Falcons, Colts, and Buccaneers in 3 consecutive weeks, the difficulty level ticks up a little bit, and we're going to have to see if Mitch is ready for that.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing, and it was the one thing I always had a bit of an argument with some of the other Bears fans at the start when they were talking about Foles starting from the off season. I agreed with what the Bears did for one reason. It was the fact that, like we've heard from a lot of the reporters, there was really only a couple of live practices at most. And it's hard for a player to lose the job when you don't have a conventional off season. The fact that we've had an easy enough, when I say easy, it's kind of the kind of better side of the schedule early on has probably helped with letting Mitch kind of play those games. I think it would be a much different story if you had the likes of, you're playing the Packers early on. If you're playing the Vikings, they might have to think about it a little bit more. But again, it's just one of those he has the chance to kind of keep his job for a certain amount of time, because if we start seeing some of the performances that filtered into his game last season, I don't think there's any question that at some point in the season he's going to get replaced, because again, all he has to do is be average. If he's average at the quarterback position, like we saw with some of the seasons under Alex Smith, where if he's just able to manage the offense where he's not giving away by throwing stupid interceptions, which we saw at times last season that put the defense under a lot of pressure. We saw in 2018 that when the Bears went out in front, the defense were able to attack. But last season, we didn't see that as much. We didn't see the team score in the first possession in most of the games last season. And you saw the defense have to kind of be more passive. I think that was the biggest change for me on offense from last season to the season prior, because the season prior, it seemed like every single time the first possession of the game, the Bears would get 3 or 7 points. And then last year, it wasn't happening. This year, I think it's important that the offense can get off to some of the fast starts to give that defense the chance to actually attack offenses and not have to be a bit more passive. The one difference that we saw last week was some semblance of a running game, where I think they got over, I think it was 149 yards of total rushing compared to last season where you weren't seeing much. We were averaging over 5 yards a carry. How much of it do you give to kind of the emphasis on the run? How much of that do you give to kind of some of the changes with the offensive line, maybe Coach Castillo coming in compared to last season?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all of it. Juan Castillo coming in as the offensive line coach, he and tight ends coach Clancy Barone were kind of tasked with building the running game. With Bill Lazor, the offensive coordinator, in there. So those 3 new coaches were really tasked with, giving a run game to Matt Nagy that he can trust. And I think we started to see that. We saw Matt Nagy trust it. And, the offensive line was better. The tight ends blocked really well. I thought Cole Kmet and Demetrius Harris had a really good game blocking, even if they didn't show up in the box score in terms of pass receptions. And then the scheme was different. They were under center a lot more. They were running a lot more outside zone. And I think that the offensive linemen kind of like that. We saw James Daniels in the second level an awful lot on Sunday. That's a really good thing. And just something as simple as this. I had Dave Wanstedt on my podcast, the Under Center podcast with NBC Sports. And he told me, like, the first thing he looked for was just he didn't see a lot of offensive linemen on the ground. Like, they were holding their own. They weren't getting pushed around. Now, I know Detroit's defensive line is a little suboptimal. You know, Trey Flowers and Denny Shelton are good players, but they're not as good as what the Bears are going to face later on in the season. Obviously, with Jamie Collins getting ejected during the game, that hurt the Lions' run defense as well. So kind of a good game for them to get their feet under them, get some momentum going into the Giants game here, another team that doesn't really particularly impress on defense. So again, it's sort of like with Trubisky. I think these two games to start the season are really important momentum builders for the Bears. If they can come out of this game on Sunday with that momentum, you know, anything can happen when you get into a tougher stretch of the season. If you start believing and you're not spinning your wheels like the Bears were last year after 2-3 games, I think that can be pretty important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the other thing that kind of stuck out to me from the game last week was when we saw the defense. The run defense was a little bit concerning, especially with going into week 2 against Saquon Barkley. Do you think that the lack of having Eddie Goldman in the middle is, and even to a certain extent, Danny Trevathan looked a bit kind of off the pace he was last year before he got injured? How important do you think the kind of presence of Eddie Goldman was to the defense? And do you think that they can make up for that at all this season?
I don't know if you can make up for it with the guys you have right now, which is not that's not supposed to be a slight at the guys the Bears have, because you know Bilal Nichols is a really good player. He's playing the nose for the first time in his career. Eddie Goldman's just a really good player. You know, when I talked to Danny Trevathan about him a year ago, he said like that's a linebacker's best friend is what Eddie Goldman does. And you know, for as good of a player as Bilal Nichols is, kind of hard for him to soak up those double teams the way that Eddie Goldman can. So I think if this keeps happening, if Saquon Barkley, who had 6 yards on 15 carries on Monday night, goes off against the Bears on Sunday, I think on Monday I'd be placing a call to Snacks Harrison's agent and saying, hey, can we get this guy in the building? Because that is going to be a problem. This Bears defense has been so good, so consistent against the run over the last couple of years. To lose that then puts a lot of pressure on the rest of this defense. And you know, with Danny, I'm more willing to give him the benefit of the doubt than I think some others are. If you look around the league, I wrote this on NBCSportsChicago.com on Thursday, that of the 18 linebackers who played, off-ball linebackers who played 80 or more percent of their team's snaps, 10 of them had grades below 50, which is pretty bad on Pro Football Focus. Danny Trevathan was the second lowest graded inside linebacker in week 1 behind Houston's Zach Cunningham. So, and they're like pretty good linebackers. Cunningham's a good linebacker. Anthony Barr was a guy below 50. Demario Davis, who was awesome for the Saints, was below 50. I just think that position in particular maybe struggled a little more than we would have thought with games going live, without the extended training camp, without preseason games, without any live tackling during training camp. So we'll see in week 2 if it gets a little bit better. You know, Trevathan looking a little slow in coverage was concerning. He also got matched up against wide receivers way too much. Yeah. That's not necessarily Danny's fault. That might be a Chuck Pagano thing. I think overall, though, with the defense, I came away feeling initially my thought was, this defense is not what we thought it was. Then you go back and you watch the game, you kind of get a couple days to think about it. And I think there is some validity to some of the excuses that can be made for this Bears defense. Now, they're not making them inside Hallis Hall, but I think there is some validity to for why Trevathan didn't look very good, why Khalil Mack didn't sack, Matthew Stafford, why the Bears almost gave up 30 points. If DeAndre Swift catches that ball in the end zone, they would have been the 10th team in week 1 to allow 30 or more points. We saw it on Thursday night with the Bengals and the Browns both getting over 30. I think offenses early in the season are probably going to be ahead of defenses for a little while. And the Bears defense, just because they had a bad week in week 1, does not mean they're going to be bad the rest of the year or disappointing the rest of the year. I still think this is a pretty talented group. If they can get Robert Quinn back either this week or next, that is going to help a lot as well.
Yeah, and I think the other important part was I think Jalen Johnson had a very good opening week. Obviously, other than when he got trucked. But again, I think I can't remember who it was. I think it was one of the defensive coaches he said that he hasn't seen a defensive back that hasn't been. So again,
Right.
you look at some of the stuff that he did. He was involved in a lot of the big plays that happened for the Bears defense. So that's always good for a rookie second round pick. So what we'll do now is just kind of moving forward to kind of this or for the second week. So we have the Giants. As we mentioned before, they're not exactly the greatest team this season, especially on defense. So should the kind of up or should the expectations be that the offense needs to be a little bit more consistent throughout the game and not just have to leave it until the fourth quarter? And do you think that is a realistic target for the Bears offense coming into week 2?
Yeah, Kieran, the word I was going to use is consistent. So you took it right out of my mouth there. I think that is what we need to see from this offense. And look, not every drive is going to be a perfect 9-play, 75-yard march down the field. But, if the Bears can keep the punting to a minimum, if they can keep the 3 and outs to a minimum, just keep the drives moving, stay ahead of the chains as much as you can, don't get in 3rd and long, then that's going to be kind of the consistency I'm looking for here. I will say this is a game that if the Bears don't win it by a lot of points, like if it's 23-20 or something like that, there might be a little bit of panic around Chicago of like, well, I can't take care of the Giants. What's going on here? Yeah. Early season football is always a crapshoot. I mean, a couple of years ago, the Patriots lost to the Lions in week 3 and then went on to win the Super Bowl. Weird stuff does happen early in the season. I think weird stuff is probably going to happen a lot more early in the season without a preseason, without any real preparation. So then not that would give the Bears a pass for a narrow win or a loss, but it would be something where we might look back on it in November if the Bears are playing well and be like, yeah, they barely beat the Giants, but a couple of years ago they barely beat the Cardinals, who were the worst team in the NFL in week 3. Yeah. So sometimes it happens. Sometimes it takes a little while to hit your groove and your stride as a team. That certainly should be taken under consideration in this season.
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, I think at the start of the season, all you're looking for is for them to win games because, again, with the extra kind of playoff, you really want them just, even no matter how they get into the playoffs, it's a team that needs to be in there every single season. You can't have where one season you're winning 12, 13 games and then the next you're winning 8. You need to kind of be able to build on something because I think we've had it too often where we've had a team that's made the playoffs once and then it takes another 10 years or so for it to happen again. So just to kind of finish our little conversation today is to go with the rest of the division. So we saw the Packers put up a lot of points against the Vikings last week, and the Vikings are a very young team this year compared to what we saw last year. The Packers now face the Lions this week. How do you see the rest of the division going? Do you think it's Packers probably comfortably in front? I know the Lions were kind of that pick that a lot of people wanted to choose for the division. I don't see it, but do you think the Vikings can be in there, even though they are kind of young and maybe a little bit more inexperienced than they have been in previous seasons?
I still think the Vikings win the division. Okay. Even after week 1, Danielle Hunter, as long as he comes back, there seems to be some thought that that he might be back in week 4, maybe later. But they get Danielle Hunter on the field with Yannick Ngakoue. They're really strong up the middle with Barr, Kendricks, Smith, and Harris at the back. Their rookie corners had some issues, certainly against Aaron Rodgers, but I think that they're still a really talented team. I think Mike Zimmer's a very organized defensive mind, and that offense under Gary Kubiak should be pretty good as the season goes on. I still think Minnesota wins the division, but hey, Green Bay sent a pretty good shot across the bow to everyone else in the NFC North of like everyone thinking we're going to regress. Hey, we're going to go put up 43 points on a really good defense in Minnesota. I think probably the class of the division, and then you got the Bears in 3rd, fighting for a playoff spot. The Lions. Well, I want to like the Lions. Like I like the kind of offense they run. Matt Patricia.
Yeah, for me, I like the team, but I don't like the coach. That's
what it comes down to. I mean, Matt Patricia is the worst coach in the division, and that's tough to overcome.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to finish it off then, so what's your prediction for the game at the weekend? Do you have to make predictions on a weekly basis for NBC Sports?
Yeah, so every Saturday I do my 3 keys and prediction on NBCSportsChicago.com and on the My Teams app. I haven't totally settled on a final score, but why don't I do it right now? I think I'm going to go Bears 24, Giants 13. I think this is a pretty handy win for the Bears.
Yeah.
I just the Giants' offense has some players. Obviously, Daniel Jones is maybe better than we give him credit for. Darius Slayton's a pretty good wide receiver. Obviously, Saquon, super talented. They can get him matched up against Danny Trevathan with Evan Ingram. They might have an advantage on offense, but that Giants' offensive line, Kieran, is a disaster. They were 32nd in pass block win rate in week 1. If Robert Quinn's on the field, I expect him to be questionable for this game. If he's on the field, this is going to be a long, long day for that Giants offense, and I think the Bears take advantage and win pretty handily.
Let's hope that happens anyway. So everybody just like, subscribe the video, and thanks for today, JJ. It's really good talking to you for week 2.
By the way, you're lucky that I did stay on here because you played a Manchester City fan on with a highlight of Anthony Martial and Manchester United. So
I know.
Lucky that I decided it was okay.
That's fine. You're probably going to have a better season than us anyway, so it's fine.
Hey, thank you, FFP lawyers. Can still be in the Champions League to have my hopes crushed in the semifinals.
Yeah, well, at least you get to watch the Champions League again this year. All right, thanks, JJ.
All right, cheers, Kieran. Thank you.
Cheers.